before going to college. My choice left me with mixed emotions because I felt bored and lost for half of the year. Most of my friends had already moved away for college, and my devoted ex-girlfriend left me for someone in her co-op dorm. In the meantime, I worked full-time at minimum wage and tried to live up to my expectations. I live in a very small town and didn't realize how few opportunities there were for a new romance until I found myself single. I was athletic and the type of guy who had no problem with picky women, but with few local women meeting my standards, it didn't really matter. It was Thursday night, and to me, it was just another night. For my friends in college, it was something completely different. My daily routine didn't allow me to do the things my friends were tweeting about on social media as they prepared for a night out at college. I could only take solace in the fact that I had already been accepted into the college of my choice next year, and that perhaps the money I was saving would give me an economic advantage over women. I was getting ready for another evening session with a variety of adult films to help me fall asleep. While looking through the movie options, I decided to mix things up. I decided to start searching for mature women and found a series of galleries that I liked. One hand was between my legs, and in the other there was a mouse. My eyes scanned each picture as I pleasured myself. I scrolled back and forth from gallery to gallery, and as I scrolled, I discovered that one image was constantly blocked by ads. He advertised a website to find local women, which I didn't believe, judging by the look of the model in the picture. I went to the site anyway because I was curious. I tried searching the local users registry, but found that there were no users nearby. I moved away from my hometown, and there were people looking for a connection. I had never used online dating services, and since I live in a small town, my pride did not allow it. I decided to cheat and create an account where I lived in the city where I was going to attend college. The city was only a few hours away and seemed much more feasible considering I could go there too if I wanted. I entered all the required information and indicated my intention to find someone to participate with no strings attached. After completing registration, I clicked through the member homepage. I looked through dozens of local profiles and eliminated people who didn't interest me. I discovered that messaging people was not possible without paying for a subscription, and I immediately felt like I was taken. I was not ready to pay for this service. I was about to close my quick experiment window when I noticed the chat option. I selected this option to see if it would be as unsolicited as an email, but a screen with other online participants opened in front of me. I looked at the list of participants. The person closest to me was at the top of the list. They were also listed as living in the same city as my future college. They were the only online members I was close to, and they were a couple. She was almost 15 years older than me, and he was almost 20. They had a picture of her on their profile, and no matter the age, she was my beauty. She was wearing black lingerie and had a very perky rear profile. Her face wasn't in the photo, but almost all the photos on the site didn't have faces. I read the profile description there, and it turns out they are looking for men interested in watching sexual acts. It detailed how her husband enjoyed watching her get aroused with other men. I paused and looked at their profile and photo a few times. I doubted whether this couple actually existed. I was thinking about sending them a message and how I would introduce myself if I did, when my speakers started ringing. I looked at the screen and found that I had an incoming message from the same couple. The couple opened with an innocent message of, "Hi." I fumbled around trying to find a way to message them back, but eventually opened the correct window. My heart was pounding as I wrote, "Hey, how are you guys tonight?" After a short pause, they replied, "We're doing well, and we're just looking around to see who is available." After asking them what they were looking for, they explained that they were a couple considering the experiment, but not sure how far they were willing to go. They explained that she liked the idea of other men flirting with his wife, and she liked the way he turned on when she was naughty. They explained that they did not plan to go beyond online flirting, but they liked the temptation. I wanted and was ready to see more of this woman, but it was obvious that I would have to play their game if I wanted to see more than just a profile picture. You can tell your husband that if he wants another guy to tell his wife she has a hot ass, then I'm his man, I wrote, laughing out loud. I then asked if she had any other photographs and which ones she would be willing to show me. Then she published several more photos in which her face is not present, but her body is in various erotic poses. In every photo, she was wearing erotic lingerie, and I immediately envied her husband's condition. Her body was perfect, it was soft and feminine. She was mature, but her curves were in all the right places. I could remember my ex-girlfriends trying to pose erotically in the past, and how awkward they all looked. This woman exuded confidence, and every outfit suited her like a glove. I confessed to them, "Your husband is a happy man, and if I had a chance, you would be a happy woman." I had never been with a woman older than me, but at that moment she was the object of all my desires. They then asked if I had a photo to share. They wanted me to be able to provide them with something that would let them know that I was someone they wanted to communicate with. I told them I would be attending a local college in their city and named the school and program that interested me. I told them that I didn't have any photos prepared, but I could prepare some for next time. "Do you have a webcam?" they asked, and suddenly an image appeared on my screen. They turned on the webcam. She was sitting in a computer chair in front of the camera, and he was behind her. Their faces were not visible as the camera was aimed at chest level. They were dressed as usual, but it was clear that her husband's hands were roaming over her body as she typed. I tried to accept their offer again and found the webcam button. I positioned the camera so it never looked above my chest and then turned it on. When my image appeared in front of them, they stopped and looked visibly scared. I saw her husband's hands sliding over her body, and it looked like his hand briefly slid between her legs. His prompt must have prompted her next question. "Can you put the camera down? I want to see what you're doing there." I felt a little shy as it was my first time using a camera for this, but I felt safe knowing it wasn't my face they wanted to see. I adjusted the camera so that the focus remained on me. This seemed to immediately attract their attention. I noticed her expression on the screen become more relaxed when she finally dared to look directly at me. She took a deep breath, her gaze full of curiosity and slight hesitation. Her husband, sitting next to her, noticed her reaction and gently put his arm around her shoulders as if encouraging her. We exchanged short messages, discussing the situation, and I suggested that they leave all worries behind and just relax. "Just get comfortable and trust the moment," I wrote. She read this message, and her husband also looked at the screen, reading my words. They exchanged warm smiles, and it seemed to ease some of the tension. After that, she got up and began to straighten her clothes, and her husband, as if encouraging her, tenderly touched her hand, helping to put everything in order. It seemed like a kind of ritual of trust and support that showed their close bond and affectionate relationship. When she sat down again, her husband was again next to her. On the screen, I saw how they became closer to each other, delicately looked at each other, laughed, and seemed to share a little secret that only the two of them understood. Her attention returned to me from time to time, as if they were together figuring out what to do next. Soon I invited her to express her thoughts if she wanted. She didn't answer right away, but the smile on her face was more eloquent than words. Then she turned to her husband, and a quiet but understanding conversation began between them. It was noticeable how he supported her at every stage, giving her space to make choices. After some time, she turned to me again, and I felt that their mood had finally moved into a state of complete trust and curiosity. "The situation is unusual for us, but at the same time interesting," she said with a smile, slightly covering her face with her hand. Her husband nodded in agreement, supporting her words, and looked at her with understanding, conveying all his support and confidence to her. In the background, I saw her husband moving as if he was undressing. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was shocked by what I saw. When he approached her from the side, without hiding his embarrassment, their eyes met, and for a moment both froze, feeling both excitement and slight tension. She looked at him with interest and a friendly smile, as if reading his thoughts, and a slight blush appeared on her face, which betrayed her hidden feelings. His voice, quiet and slightly embarrassed, sounded in the silence, and she felt the excitement gradually growing inside her from this unexpected confession. His words about how he had long wanted to see her with someone else, although he kept it a secret, were unexpected and caused a mixture of emotions. She looked at him, feeling the depth of trust that existed between them so strong that he decided to share this hidden dream with her. The slight anxiety and novelty of this conversation made it even more important, and her smile and encouraging look gave him the confidence to continue. She was a little nervous, but she knew he was there to support her, and that only made her bolder. There was an unusual frankness and simplicity in their interaction, as if they were finally able to open up to each other on a deeper level. "Do you really want this?" she asked with a slight smile, catching his thoughtful gaze. Without thinking for a moment, he nodded and replied that for him, she will always be the most attractive and beautiful woman in the world, and this thought will not destroy their connection, but, on the contrary, will only strengthen it. His frankness made her smile, and she felt truly free at that moment. She was attracted by the ease and understanding that they were able to create between themselves. The silence that followed was filled with a deep feeling in which no words were required. At that moment, both knew that their relationship had acquired special significance. They not only shared the joys of everyday life, but were also ready to open up to each other, sharing their deepest desires and dreams, trusting each other completely. She stepped closer and touched his hand with a smile, grateful for the level of understanding and sincerity they were able to achieve. These moments of intimacy and frankness seemed infinitely valuable to them, as if for the first time they truly understood each other. She knew that no matter what lay ahead, they could always be honest and open with each other, and that feeling gave their bond a depth that would stay with them forever. "I want to see your face," I wrote quickly between strokes. "He wants to see my face, or," she moaned. "Not during sex, but should we send him a picture?" she asked. "Yes," he said with a deep, controlled sigh. He tried his best to control himself. I then quickly wrote my email address in the message box. I saw him pick up the pace and have sex with her faster than before. I was getting closer to discovering the mystery of who I was looking at. "What photos should I send?" she begged. She sounded interested and willing to do anything he could ask. "Send him your favorite naughty pictures of your face," he said with a grunt. At first I heard her ask him if the photos she had chosen were acceptable, and every time he agreed. She seemed to add a few more photos after getting caught up in the moment. The message has been sent and is in the process of being delivered. She felt like a victim of her own lust as she reached behind her and touched herself. To her delight, he reached forward, grabbed the back of her curly black hair, and pulled it back so that her ecstatic face was in full view of the camera. We spent the next few seconds giving in to our euphoric needs, and I could see her face clearly. I knew this woman, and I knew her well. Her name was Rachel, and she was the sister of one of my best friends. I spent many evenings dreaming of being with this woman. She was one of my first crushes as a child. She was a local business owner and the one I worked for last summer. Her husband Colin was a local teacher, and I was his previous student. They must have been lying about where they lived, just like me. After they finished having sex, he pulled away from her, and she stood up, out of the camera's view. They both laughed and commented that they didn't expect to do this tonight. Neither of them paid attention to the camera, and their lustful impulses seemed satisfied. They both stopped and froze when one of them finally looked at the screen again. She made a movement to cover herself with her hand, but it could also have been a desire to stroke her own breasts. He dived towards the screen, and then our communication ended. My last message was, "Hi, Rachel. You can tell Colin I'd love to have a good time with you." Perhaps it was my wicked sense of humor, but with every passing second, I wanted to get serious about having her as my own. I opened my email and found a message with several photos of my newly acquired friends. They were all naked or in their underwear with her. Every photo clearly had her face in it, and she looked like she spent a lot of time on her makeup and smile. As I looked through her photos and went back to enjoying her images, I thought about how I would use the email address they wrote to me from. I wondered if I should contact them first and remind them that they had opposing views on what my discretion should be. I was fixated on one of her best photos as my pleasure approached, and at that moment I was sure that I wanted to pursue this woman. I was amazed at my good fortune to have found someone so close to me who I had always found attractive. She had always been someone I thought was unattainable, but now she was my desire. I was on edge when a new letter appeared. It was from the same email address. I opened the letter and read its contents. I didn't quite like it. He asked us all to become adults, and for me to respect their discretion. He asked me to delete the photos I sent, and I realized that this is all part of the fantasy they like to play. Every sentence asked me to understand that they did not want to pursue anything other than a cybersexual relationship with me. This letter was supposed to strengthen my desire to be a good person, and I was not sure if I could do anything unwanted towards these good people. I really wanted her, but I knew it was probably just a game for them. I would respect them and not write back to them, but I wouldn't delete the photos either, I thought. I guess I can always try to meet them online another time and try my luck again, I thought. The second new letter arrived while I was still adjusting to the first. It was from a different email address, and it had Rachel in its name. I opened the email and read the one-sentence question. Do you secretly still want to be with a married woman, knowing it's me? Yes, I whispered. It was like an involuntary movement as my finger pressed the send button. Perhaps it was my husband's continued support or my newfound curiosity that prompted me to send this letter. At first I was frozen in fear when the shadowy figure we had just met on a dating site admitted that he knew us. I had no idea who he was, but he certainly knew us. My husband's fetish for other men flirting with me was wearing away at my moral restraint, but I hadn't planned on playing this erotic game so close to home. I've thought many times about what it would be like to have the comfort of another man, but my fears still haunt me. The image of the man previously shown on my screen was bright and bold. It had to be someone much younger than me, and quite possibly someone my husband had recently taught at school. This accidental confession included a catalog of my most explicit photographs, which were now in the hands of a man who lived in our small town and could now do untold damage to our reputation. The feeling of danger was mixed with a feeling of erotic intoxication. My thoughts went back and forth, but even when my husband was told to write to him and ask for his discretion, my need for clarification took over. I went into the bathroom while he was writing an email to the shadowed figure and turned on the shower. When I took a shower, he had to beg for understanding, and the explanation of what happened was only part of the erotic adventure of a married couple. Having undressed and turned on the shower, I sat down on a stool. I felt dizzy with anxiety consuming my mind. I wanted to cry, but instead I reached for the phone. I check my email so often that it was the first thing I saw on the screen when I slid the unlock panel. I still remembered his email address from earlier, and without thinking, it was the first thing I added to the new message I started. I wrote several introductory sentences and deleted my requests for discretion each time. My request started with me asking him to delete my photos, but then the attempts changed to him keeping them for himself. I was thinking about writing how angry I was that he didn't tell us where he lived at first, but then I realized that we were also lying about the location of our hometown. As I sat there trying to type words that would stick to my phone screen, I started to daydream. The man my husband forced me to bear all to was everything I secretly denied myself. He was young, muscular, and very dangerous. I always wanted to protect my husband from the scrutiny of our guilty pleasures, but my mind was dominated by images of how I could influence him. I wanted this problem to go away, but now it is out of my control. The appeal of this unknown figure as the beautifully dangerous man I wanted to dream about grew in my mind. The uncertainty of not knowing what he really thought of me and what he could do to our reputation was a heavy burden. I had turned down dozens of my husband's offers to create a similar relationship, but I had never felt such heat before. Thoughts of him ruining our marriage and how I might appear desirable wrestled with the figures of my conscience. That's when my finger finally landed on the send button. I may have thought it was a mistake, but my desire to fulfill my growing fantasy may have taken over. I was afraid of what the reassuring contact would lead to, but I needed to know what he was thinking. I forced myself to ask him, "Do you secretly still want to be with a married woman, knowing that it's me?" The guilt and stress of what I was helping to maintain caused a rush of blood to my head and my lady parts. I read the email to him one last time before putting my phone down and getting into the shower. I kept one hand on the wall and one foot on the edge of the bathtub. The thoughts of him caressing himself with my photographs and wanting me to be only his crowded out all other thoughts from my head. What if he wants me? I whispered. Bip. My phone just received an email. I quickly returned the shower head to its place and rushed for the phone. With one foot outside the shower, I held onto the grab bar with my other hand. My heart was pounding with excitement. How did he answer my question? I was overcome with fear at the thought that perhaps my husband could hear the sounds of my solo activities with an incoming message. I grabbed the phone, dripping water onto the floor, and opened the most recent message with a wet hand. Yes, it's no secret that I want to be with you, and I like that you're married. I want to see you, the letter read. I reread it several times, each time hoping that it would say more than it did. Old fears disappeared, giving way to new ones. He really wants me. What will he do if I refuse him? I burst out. I knew that I had succumbed to desires that are usually only talked about in fantasies, but I couldn't stop. I wanted to find out who he was, but I was afraid to lead him along, knowing that he had so many of my personal photographs in his hands. I didn't want to meet him alone, but I needed to see him. Having quickly come up with a solution, I wrote without hesitation. Come to my store tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. My husband will be there, and the rest of the staff will be leaving for lunch. Please don't tell my husband that I asked you out, or that you are the same guy we met online. I would like to meet you in a safe environment, without pressure, I wrote. After sending the second deceptive letter, I again felt only the satisfaction of being desired. My thoughts turned back to meeting this man and my newfound sense of my own attractiveness. The presence of my husband would protect me and my virtue, because I understood that there was no point in tempting fate. Take me, I beg you, take me now, I whispered with each pulse. After I finished showering and drying off, I went into the bedroom, wrapped in a towel. My husband was already lying in bed, with the nightlight on and the iPad in his hands. I sent him a letter asking for respect, he said in a soothing tone. I threw off the towel and slid under the blanket next to him, then glanced at the screen of his iPad. There was a letter he sent to the mysterious man. It asked that everyone act like adults and use discretion. The letter told him to delete the photos he sent and also explained that all this was just part of the fantasy that we liked. This letter was in stark contrast to what I had just written, and I was afraid of how my husband would react to the difference in messages. Then the husband scrolled down the screen and the man's answer appeared. I felt a tightening in my chest when I started reading it. Your secrets and fantasies are safe with me, and I hope you can trust me to play with those fantasies again. I will not contact you again unless you contact me first. I wish I could save the pictures of Rachel, but they are for my eyes only, he wrote. That's it, it's done, the husband remarked. We can only hope that this man liked the show we gave him and that he will keep everything a secret. I'm sure he wouldn't want to be that creepy guy who admits to spying on dating sites, he added with a laugh. Well, your wish partially came true. Now we have a man in our circle who finally shares some of our intimacy, and I hope you still find it exciting, I said with a slight reproach. To some extent, he replied after a pause. I love the idea of someone sharing our games, as long as it's primarily about us and not getting public. I work at a school, and it would be a disaster if your photos went viral, he said, gradually switching to whispers. His words that this must be about us first constantly echoed in my head. I already made the mistake of contacting him personally. I encouraged him to meet us so that only I would know who he was. I had a chance to tell my husband what I had done, but instead I buried myself in my pillow and waited to fall asleep. The next day I got up and got dressed before my husband even got out of bed. I knew I'd see him this afternoon when he had his extended break on Friday. However, I needed to open our store, which had been in existence for 3 generations and required long hours and complete dedication. Arriving at work, I greeted familiar faces. We ran a business selling agricultural feed, and most of my employees came from farming families. Receiving morning greetings from everyone, I looked them straight in the eyes. For the first time, I realized that most of them could be that mysterious person. They have physical jobs, and many of them are young and fit. It was entirely possible that it could have been any of them, but luckily no one looked at me any differently than they did yesterday. For the rest of the morning, I carefully observed any changes in the behavior of those around me, trying to catch if someone was whispering or looking after me. The reality that I didn't know who he was in our little community weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't stop myself from mentally trying on the body I'd seen last night on several of my coworkers. In the end, I came to the conclusion that it was unlikely that it was one of them, but I chuckled, reproaching myself for not noticing how attractive my employees were before. The morning passed quickly as the influx of clients ahead of our shortened Friday schedule occupied all of our attention. We always close early on Friday, leaving me to complete administrative matters. When the last employee left the workplace, I asked him to leave the door open as I was waiting for my husband for a late lunch. Deep down, I wanted the door to remain open for a possible guest. It was no later than 12:30, and I was in my office, tidying up my desk. I was preparing paperwork for future orders and checking accounts when the phone rang. I responded with the usual business greeting and waited for an answer. "Hi, honey, I can't come to lunch today. I'm a science fair judge today, and I'll be busy all day," he said, pausing. It was my husband, and his news was not part of my plans. "Today? Why today?" I blurted out. "I don't have lunch with me, and you always come on Fridays," I pleaded. "Sorry, darling, I can't do it today, but we'll definitely have dinner together tonight," he replied, perhaps a little confused by my insistent tone. I realized that he had work, and it was useless to insist on his coming without the risk of seeming even more suspicious. My thoughts were preoccupied with the fact that he wouldn't be able to come to the office and the chance that an unknown person would show up. That's why I didn't hear the bells on the front door when it opened. When the door closed and the bells rang again, I realized that someone had entered the store. Loudly, from my office, I shouted, "We are closed." My husband heard me call out to a visitor and, as usual, hung up, realizing that I was busy with a client. I looked at my watch more closely and saw that it was only 12:20 and felt relieved as it was probably too early for a stranger to appear. I got up from the table and went out into the small room of the store to meet the visitor. It was Sam, our temporary employee and a good friend of my little brother. He stood with his back to the door and looked as if he was contemplating turning around and leaving. "Hi, Sam. We don't have any extra work right now, but can I count on your help in the summer as usual?" I said, sighing with relief that it wasn't a stranger. "It's a pity that there is nothing extra, but of course, count on me in the summer," he replied. "So what have you been doing all year while your girlfriend and my brother are away at college?" I asked, at the same time wondering how to keep him in the store. If Sam stays with me, I won't be alone if a stranger shows up. I had known Sam for many years, and his friendship with his brother made him almost like family. He was always a little shy around me, and only after my question he stepped further from the door, answering, "This year has been boring, and I already broke up with my girlfriend. I can't wait to go to college, but for now I'm, so to speak, a bachelor." Then he looked around and added, "Has everyone gone home yet?" "Yes, you know what our Friday schedule is. It's just me here for the rest of the day," I replied, immediately realizing the failure of my phrase. "How about you help me with one thing before you go? I'll pay you in cash if you help with the necessary papers," I begged. He smiled at his luck and replied, "Of course." I left the door unlocked because I didn't want to offend the stranger if he showed up, and I was glad that I now had a familiar person next to me, although I had a new problem what to do with Sam. My office was already in perfect order, and I really had nothing to entrust him with. He took off his coat and placed it on the front counter. Then he headed to my office, but motioned that he would be back in a minute, since he had gone into the bathroom. Following my first instincts, I continued my plan to keep my protector with me, but busy with business. When he disappeared into the bathroom, I quickly went into the office and opened several tall file cabinets. I pulled out stacks of files and laid them out on the floor, dividing them into neat little piles. In less than 2 minutes, I managed to completely disrupt the order in my archive. I had just sat down in my chair when he appeared in the doorway of my office. He looked at me with wide eyes, shocked. "Oh my God, Rachel, I've never seen your office in such a mess," he said, lightly tapping the stack of files with the toe of his boot. Gritting my teeth, I just shrugged and smiled back at him. We started cleaning up the chaos I had just created. Time flew by as we organized the files and returned them to the shelves. I constantly watched the clock, and one ear was always alert towards the door. We hardly spoke, which was strange even for Sam with his slight shyness. I, however, was too immersed in my thoughts and images of who might come in at the next moment. Unnoticed, 1 o'clock in the afternoon approached, and no one came to me. The longer we spent cleaning things up, and the more files returned to their places in the closet, the more my anxiety grew. I asked Sam what time it was, and he said it was after 1. Then I asked him to tell me the exact time, and he said that it was 1:14. I told the man to come at about 1, but that time was already starting to disappear. I began to feel that I was carried away by the very thought of his coming, and only his face could satisfy my curiosity. Maybe he's changed his mind about dating me, I thought with a growing sense of rejection. I sat down and let Sam continue sorting through the remaining files. I took my phone out of my desk drawer and began searching through my email folders for unread messages. He never responded, I thought, looking at the empty inbox. I didn't take into account that he never actually agreed to meet me in the office today. I felt stupid, thinking that I could just call him out like he would drop everything and come to me the next day. I pushed the images of him with girls half my age out of my head and reread his last message asking for a meeting. I was careful to make sure that only I could see the phone screen. I probably should have felt better that I wouldn't have to meet this stranger today without my husband, but the desire to find out who he was haunted me. With my back against the wall, phone in hand, I started typing a message. "I'm in the office, but you still haven't come." But she immediately deleted what she had written, deciding that it would look too desperate. I felt a blush come to my face, and any action with the phone now caused a feeling of some kind of guilt. I told Sam I'd be gone for a while and went into the bathroom to be alone with the phone. Locking the door behind me, I started typing again, hesitating between each word. "See you today. I'll be alone from 2 to 4. I quickly sent a message before I could change my mind. I needed to know if he would answer. I waited, and soon my phone rang with a new message. "I'm busy at work right now, lol, but I'm sure I can be persuaded to do something else," he replied. I was already up to my ears in this with him, and now he was also teasing me, forcing him to achieve. This made me angry, but at the same time, it made me even more eager to resolve this situation. "To hell with it," I muttered to myself. I pulled the straps of the dress down my shoulders and let my doubts disappear along with the clothes. I stood in the bathroom, dressed only in my favorite lingerie. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. I always liked the way this set fits my figure, and I knew that I chose it today for a reason. I straightened my hair, ran my hand through my waves, and picked up my phone to take a selfie in the mirror. I took a few photos, but later decided that the best one was the one where I was looking over my shoulder, showing off the playful outline of my underwear. I didn't plan on going that far to find out who this person was, but sending a revealing selfie didn't stop me. After attaching a photo to the message, I wondered how I could playfully entice him to open up. If I really wanted him to show who he was, I needed to get his attention. With a hint, I wrote, "You will never see this in person if you don't come say hi to me." I sent a message and waited. This photo was the first of its kind that I sent to someone other than my husband. I loved this dangerous game I had started with this local stranger, and my only opponent now was the fear of rejection. I realized that I had taken myself too far, and now it was important for me to find out who he was. I was still standing in front of the mirror, dressed only in lingerie, when I realized that the desire to meet this man began to excite me. I didn't know what would happen if he came and turned out to be as attractive as I imagined him, but the very image I painted was intoxicating. I took off my bra and panties and placed them on the toilet lid. Finding myself again in front of the mirror with the phone in my hand, I took a few more photos, but now naked. The first pictures were similar to the previous ones, but after a dozen pictures, I took several where I was caressing myself with my second hand. I tried not to want all the things I imagined would happen if he showed up, but only a thud from behind me could bring me back to reality. I turned and looked at the toilet, and I saw that my underwear slipped off the lid and fell into the water. "Damn," I whispered. This turn of events instantly killed my entire mood and any thought of continuing what I started. I looked at the phone again and saw that there was still no answer. I gave up. If he comes, well, so be it, and if it adds even more humiliation to last night, then I can only blame my husband for planting these thoughts in my head, I thought. I pulled my underwear out of the toilet and climbed onto the seat. Then I lifted the false ceiling tiles and hid the wet things there to pick them up later when I had my bag. Then I put the dress back on and pulled the straps up over my shoulders, looking in the mirror. I hoped that it wouldn't be noticeable that I was now without underwear. It's unlikely that Sam will notice if I stand still, I thought. I felt humiliated, but I still managed to smile a little at my own stupidity. I opened the bathroom door and returned to the office. She walked inside, trying not to attract attention to herself. She sat down on a chair before greeting Sam, who was still stubbornly sorting through his files. We were both silent for a minute as he worked intently alone until he asked, "I'm almost done sorting these files. Will you need me to stay after this?" I thought about it before answering. I still haven't finished my day job, and if Sam leaves, I'll be left alone if that man decides to come. I'm sure I'll find something to do for you when you're done with these files. I can't believe I wore this dress today. It's so uncomfortable to do something physical on the floor, I said and laughed. Then I heard a vibration coming from Sam, but I didn't think anything of it. I again began to think about how to detain him until late in the evening. I was thinking about keeping him busy, moving a large bag of feed from one end of the warehouse to the other to keep him busy when I noticed Sam take his vibrating phone out of his pocket. He unlocked the screen and clicked on some notification. From a distance, I saw an image appear on his screen, and although I could not see it clearly, I immediately knew that it was me. The time it took to send the photo probably took longer than I expected, and I didn't even realize I was sending it to Sam. I was once his nanny, and my husband taught him at school. He must have been at least 15 years younger than me, and barely had time to become an adult. His friendship with my brother made him like a member of our family, and I never thought of him differently. How could I be so blind? I froze, speechless. I couldn't think of a single word that could mitigate the consequences of my previous actions. He continued to look at the image on the phone screen and perhaps did not even know that I was seeing it too. He rose from his chair without taking his eyes off the screen and slowly approached me. I was still paralyzed, too shocked to even try to pretend I hadn't noticed. He took 2 small steps towards me while I was sitting in the chair. His gaze never left the phone. This gesture brought my legs into action, but my tongue still did not obey me as I stood up to meet his approach. He finally looked up from the phone, wrapped a strong arm around my waist, and pulled me towards him. Smiling, he looked into my eyes and said, "Hello." I was so stunned that my open mouth probably made him think this was the right moment to kiss me. His lips covered mine. I might have taken a step back, but the chair and his arms held me, pressing me to him. When he kissed me, his movements coincided with mine, and my timid attempts at resistance only spurred his hands to explore my body. I raised my hands to his chest in defense and pressed with my palms, but his warmth made me momentarily forget that I wanted to push him away, and I realized his full masculinity for the first time. I was about to ask him to stop, but my momentary hesitation only prompted him to hold me tighter. I stopped and let him kiss me completely, letting forgotten memories of past romances come to mind. I closed my eyes for a moment and let his lips cover mine. I felt the passion and energy burning brightly in someone his age. I felt his exploring hands move over my body, and his male arousal pressed against my stomach. As he tightened his grip on me, I tried to pull away again, moving my hands from his chest to his hips, trying to break the contact. I fought not to give in to the temptation of this forbidden fruit in front of me. When my hands broke contact with his body, he did not immediately understand that it was resistance. His hands slid down my back and to the straps of my dress. He acted with a confidence that belied his age as he carefully removed them from my shoulders. The straps slid down to my wrists, and before I could react, they continued to slide over my fingers and fell to the floor. Now I stood naked in front of him, to our mutual surprise. "Rachel, I didn't know you were so interested in me," he said, pulling me towards him again and trying to silence my objections with a kiss. I threw my head back, trying to find a moment to say something. "You don't understand." "I didn't know it was you," I said, trying to explain that I didn't even think it was him who I was waiting for, but the words didn't come. The gap between our bodies gave him the opportunity to look at me. "I also didn't know it was you when we met online, but when I realized, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I've been secretly in love with you for most of my life, but I never thought it could be mutual. I was too nervous to take the first step until you asked me for your photo. At first I felt guilty when I touched your body, but I was happy to see that you supported me by removing your underwear." His last words made him smile, and he looked me up and down with open satisfaction. In his gaze, I realized that every word he said was true. In the past, I would have judged myself for looking at him the way I did, but for the first time in my life, I saw Sam as a man, a very young man. "You don't understand," I repeated, turning around and bending down to pick up the fallen dress. "I didn't know it was you when I sent those photos, but when you came here today, I wanted you to stay because I trust you," I said, but my sentence was cut off mid-sentence. When I turned around, he was already standing behind me, holding my hips tightly to him. He still didn't understand that my nakedness was a mistake and that I never agreed to it. He wasn't the mysterious stranger I was expecting, but when he pressed my buttocks against his aroused body, I loved it. He wasn't a mystery, but that didn't make it any less dangerous, knowing him the way I knew him. All the old memories of him began to be replaced by new ones as he slowly pulled me closer to him, continuing to move his hips. He reached his hand to my shoulder, gently turned me so that I was standing upright, and began to look into my eyes again. He started kissing me again, holding my nakedness in his hands, and something about his touch made me turn away in embarrassment. I felt myself begin to respond to his kisses, and I allowed him to hug me tightly. He stopped our kiss and began to move down my neck with warm, greedy kisses. I heard his belt jingle as he unbuckled it. I stood naked in front of someone barely of legal age and tried to close my eyes to focus on what was happening. His kisses continued to move lower until he knelt in front of me, breathing deeply against my trembling body. All the disturbing thoughts that I was an unfaithful wife began to dissipate with each of his soft touches. I still felt embarrassed, not daring to show him how pleasant he was to me. I looked down and saw how he was enjoying my feelings, my every movement, as if they were created only for him. My body had already given itself to him, and soon I felt that even my voice was ready to do the same. "Lock the door and turn on the music in the store," I said with uncertainty when his fingers touched my most intimate place. He looked up at me and smiled before rising to his feet. He moved away to comply with my request, and I tried to cover my naked body with my dress, but he caught my wrist. All he said was, "Don't," and I let go of the dress again, and it fell to the floor. He let me go and went to close the store so nothing could interrupt us. As he walked through the store, I realized that I was still standing naked in the office where I conducted my business, and this sensation was excitingly new to me. His confession that he had been in love with me for a long time brought me unexpected satisfaction. I was pleased to know that I was still attractive, but now I wanted more. I understood that the temptation to be with him violated all the norms, and I knew that it was wrong, but I could no longer stop. I wanted to feel like the woman my husband dreamed about in our nightly conversations, but now I allowed myself to become a part of these fantasies completely. I heard his footsteps approaching the office and saw his figure in the doorway. I lay across my desk, trying to look as seductive as possible. "I've never done this before, and my husband shouldn't find out," I said with an uncertain, tense smile. "I thought that you just wanted him to find out, or is it just because he's not around right now? Besides, if I'm not mistaken, you were much more excited last night, imagining how another man could brag about what he made you do," he said, gently stroking the inside of my thigh. "I like the idea that your husband might find out about this, but that won't stop me from taking you right now," he grinned seductively. In all the years I've known Sam, I've never heard him talk like that, and it drove me crazy. "Sam, this is any way to talk to your boss while you're at work," I said, spreading my legs wider to encourage him. I felt so free to express myself. I wanted to go back to the position where he was groping me almost against my will. "That's right, Rachel. I work until 4 p.m. and my fee will be paid in person today," he said, grinning with a reddened face. He then took my body in his arms and kissed me. He pulled me to my feet so gently that I lost contact with his lips. Secretly, I wished it was his way so I couldn't accept his terms. He squeezed my ass again and went back to touching me in places that had previously only been reserved for one man. My mouth was watering, and if I hadn't given in to my lust yet, I was now ready to. I found myself on my knees in front of him, feeling how something warm and soft filled the atmosphere around us. It was not just a feeling of closeness, rather, immersion in the flow of emotions that had accumulated over all this time. I breathed quietly, trying to calm myself, although my heart was beating so hard that it seemed like he could hear it. He leaned down carefully, allowing me to look straight into his eyes, where surprise and undisguised sincerity were mixed. I noticed how he also seemed a little nervous, although this added to the extraordinary touchingness of the moment. His hand fell on my shoulder, gently but firmly, as if he wanted to say that we can just be ourselves in this moment, without expectations and without preconceptions. This gesture seemed so natural that everything around seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us. With every touch of his, I felt the tension leaving me. He ran his hand over my cheek, his fingers lightly touching my temple, as if trying to fix this moment in his memory. For a moment, it seemed to me that he would say something important, but falling silent, he only smiled warmly, and I, following his example, gave him a smile in return. Our eyes met, and in this exchange there was an unspoken dialogue in which there was no need for words. We stayed like that for a few minutes, just enjoying each other's presence. I couldn't help but put my hand on his hand, which was still resting on my shoulder. This small gesture made the atmosphere even warmer and more trusting. A sparkle flashed in his eyes, and I realized that, despite all the circumstances, we were both sincerely glad that this moment was happening between us. He said my name quietly, and his voice sounded soft, as if he wanted to capture this moment not only in his memory, but in every word he uttered. This quiet address was enough for me to understand that our feelings may have remained the same for a long time, even if we tried to ignore them. I smiled back, hoping that this moment would become part of our shared memories that would always keep us warm, even when we went our separate ways. Silence enveloped us, and it seemed that the whole world stood still in anticipation. I had a feeling of clarity that only comes after sexual satisfaction. "Sam, you had sex with me. I didn't plan for this to happen, and I didn't have time to tell you that I wanted protection," I said in an urgent tone. He didn't say anything, but his shocked look told me that he sympathized with my fears. "I think it's time for us to get dressed. We've taken enough risks today," I said again, lifting my dress. I stormed out of the room, went to grab my underwear, still in the bathroom, and stuffed it into my purse. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a flushed, disfigured face staring back at me. I was still naked and parts of my body were pink from the rough treatment. I pulled the dress over my head and fastened the straps as I walk out the door. I found Sam standing near the counter on the customer's side. He was dressed again and seemed to be waiting for me to show him off. As I approached him, I saw that there were still beads of sweat on his forehead, and his hands looked swollen, like those of a man working hard. "Thank you for stopping by, Sam, and please don't tell anyone about this. I don't want to regret the best sex I've ever had, I said, trying to laugh off the awkward goodbye. Aren't you going to put them back on? He asked, pointing to my purse. My underwear partially spilled out of my open bag. He walked over to me and pulled my thong out of my purse. I've only seen them in your photos, and they would make a great prize, he said, smiling. You want my underwear, I said, realizing his age. Sam, are you going to treat me like some trophy cougar you tell your friends about, or are you the nice gentleman I always thought you were? I said in a sarcastic voice. I'd rather you be the hot cougar I sleep with on the side, and it would be much more impressive if I mentioned that you're my boss. Don't you think so? He said, putting my thong in his pocket. He had a teasing smile and was playfully trying to make me nervous. You can't tell them I was your boss. Any local will know it was me, I replied after being teased. Don't worry about it. They'll know it's you when I show them the pictures, and next year I'll have the same panties to hang on my dorm room wall, he said with a sly grin. Damn him, he's teasing me, and it feels so good, I thought. I knew I should leave immediately before he lured me in again, but I enjoyed being a prisoner of his explicit overtures. Please give me back my panties and keep this between us, I said, trying to be sincere. I'm kidding, I would never do anything you didn't want. Take them back and I promise to never do anything like that, he said, pulling the top of my thong out of his pocket so I could grab it. His insolence in forcing me to dig through his pockets should have angered me, but I wanted to be no less tempting. I took a step towards him, grabbed the fabric of his pocket, and pulled lightly. The pull was too weak to pull the panties out of his pocket, and he responded by looking at me with a question. His mockery hit me to the core, to what I really wanted. I carefully put my panties back in his pocket and said, I trust you to do this right, and I hope your friends are impressed. You're so brave, but I'm starting to think that it's you who wants me to come back. What story should I walk away with, and will there be a reason to come back? He said, without a hint of humor in his expression. I opened my mouth, but couldn't say anything. I looked at the pinnacle of my fantasy, and he guessed my desire to become his reward. Just don't let my brother find out about this, I whispered after a short silence. Standing at the store's simple glass window, he reached out to me, but only grabbed the straps of my dress. He tore them at my shoulders and tore my dress down the back. I stood surrounded by scraps of dress at my ankles, my arm around his shoulders as he directed me back to the front counter of the store. He confidently pulled me towards him. Our gazes crossed for a moment. I felt his hand rest on my shoulder, and he carefully lifted me up, positioning me on the edge of the counter. My heart was pounding wildly, a wave of excitement and anticipation rose in my chest, from which every muscle tensed in anticipation. Do you really want this? He asked, softly, but with a slight note of insistence in his voice. I saw a condom in his hand, and a slight smile touched my face, as if this action only fueled our game. We have time, I said, glancing at my watch. It was still a long time before I returned home, and this knowledge gave me courage. It's only 2:30, I added, as if persuading myself and him. He smiled, feeling that the words had become just a formality. We both understood that there were no more barriers. All that existed at that moment was us and our silent desires. His touch became more and more confident, and in every movement, in every glance, there was an energy that was impossible to escape. He took my hands, and this simple touch made my whole body respond, as if there was a special magic between us, mysterious and inevitable. I felt all caution slip away, as if the very nature of this moment was so strong that all other thoughts faded. It was not just intimacy, it was something more, something that I had dreamed of for so long that I finally allowed myself to dissolve in his every movement, every look. Do you want this? I asked, not recognizing myself. My voice was filled with expectation and something else, something almost elusive. He only answered me with a glance in which I caught a slight hint of mystery and promise. He was here and now, ready to do anything to make me feel fully. In his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own feelings, and it seemed that time had stopped. His fingers gently slid over my palm, and I let go of everything that connected me to reality, surrendering to this moment. The world around us disappeared, leaving only this moment pure, rich, and silent, like a secret union of two people who found themselves on the brink between restraint and freedom. When I heard the bathroom door close, my fingers came to life on the keyboard. I wrote the first thing that came to mind, but my thoughts were influenced by what my wife said I needed to do. We had just met someone online in one of the adult chat rooms and started chatting with the stranger, thinking that he would guarantee anonymity. But before it was over, we exchanged erotic photos and videos that revealed my deepest, darkest fantasies. We were shocked when this man called us by name and realized who we were. He claimed to live in a community at a safe distance, but we didn't take into account that he could also be lying about his current location. My fantasy has existed for years, and it is so deeply developed that I feel like it has become my sexual identity. My wife Rachel has long known about my acceptance of her approval from other men, and how my jealousy and fear give rise to my erotic delight. In a world where judgment and tradition reign supreme, it can be difficult to admit that my sexual arousal is based on the views of a voyeur. My wife tries to support my desires, and sometimes she is fascinated by my taboo gaze. In the past, she had never gone beyond the easy pleasures of flirting with strangers on the internet, and what happened was the result of an accidental mistake. The moment the stranger revealed that he knew us by name and who we were, our fears came crashing down on us. Rachel exposed herself to someone in our little community. Her family has been the backbone of the local rural community for generations. Her look of horror and disappointment at how things had gone wrong made her demand that I fix the situation and make him understand that this had to remain confidential. She then left the room to take a shower and calm her thoughts. I was a local school teacher and knew that I would be subject to ridicule and shame if our previously private photographs and fantasies became public knowledge, but something deep inside repressed that regret. As I typed a letter to a mysterious stranger, asking him to respect our privacy, I felt the sweet relief of being let out of the proverbial closet. As I wrote to this young man, who may have been one of my former students, I felt conflicted. I asked him to act like an adult and begged him to keep everything a secret. I asked him to delete the photos we sent and tried to explain that it was just a fantasy. I even tried to clarify that we had never met another man in person and that Rachel only wanted to share herself through virtual communication. After finishing the letter and pressing the send button, I realized that I had not put any of my own thoughts and desires into this letter. This letter was written only to remove the fear of the unknown and reassure my wife. If this person intends to harm us, this letter will do nothing to change the situation, but perhaps it will make him not appear in the future. I sat there wondering what I had put on the line that night and what I had to lose if this man turned out to be a young guy who was out to ruin our reputation. I was a teacher, and I knew guys his age could be cruel, but I hoped he wasn't one of those people. I opened my personal account and put my fingers on the keyboard. I heard the sound of water running in the shower and knew I had a few minutes to myself. I knew what I wanted to say, and I knew I had to be careful with this stranger. My fingers began to type out a carefully crafted message. We shocked my wife today, and she was not ready for contact with someone from our city. I would like to thank you for a pleasant evening and apologize for the fact that we found out too late that we live in the same city. It would be easy for you to share our images and talk about what you saw today, but please don't do that. You will hurt my wife a lot more than you hurt me, and it will ruin any possibility of you seeing her in the future. I ask you to be tactful and restrained so that she can recover from the shock. If you can do this, perhaps we can encourage further virtual meetings. This is Colin, and you know who I am. Please keep this letter a secret. I wrote the message and checked it only once before sending it. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't promise him anything. The only thing I understood was that if I gave him a reason to think that it was in his best interests, he might remain silent. After sending the email, I closed my account and headed to the bedroom. I climbed into bed and picked up my tablet. I then opened both email accounts and waited for a response. As I lay there, I could still hear the sound of water running from my wife's shower. Thoughts ran through my head one after another, but the main feeling was a mixture of anxiety and strange excitement. She was in no hurry tonight, but now was not the time to ask her about the water bill. Alone and ensconced in bed, I began to immerse myself in thoughts of what could happen, which gave me a mixture of feelings that had once confused me, but now I welcomed them. The fear of this stranger's unknown reaction and the slight hope that my wife would want it too led to my horniness again. I began to slowly stroke myself, plunging into thoughts that would make any protector of his wife want to vomit. I was terrified by the thought that one of my former or current students might see photographs of my wife, but the same thought excited me. At that moment, I felt the vibration of the tablet and heard the sound of an incoming message. It was him. He answered my first letter. I held my breath and took my time opening the letter, hoping it would delay the arrival of the reply I didn't want to see. Your secrets and fantasies are safe with me, and I hope you trust me enough to play with those fantasies again. I will not contact you unless you message me first. I would like to keep the photos of Rachel, but they will be for my eyes only, he wrote. I updated my email account in hopes of seeing another message from him, but nothing came through. Meanwhile, the water in the shower stopped flowing. I left my mailbox open and ready for new messages, but the only thing coming was my wife's footsteps in the hallway. Before she entered the room, I closed my email and focused on her needs. I opened his response to my first letter to Rachel, handed her the tablet, and let her scroll through the entire correspondence. This is the end, I declared. Now we can only hope that he liked our show enough to keep everything a secret. I don't think he wants to be that pervert who admits to spying on dating sites, I said, grinning. She looked shocked, and her expression resembled that of a student receiving grades after a difficult exam. Well, you got part of your wish. Now there is a man in our circle who knows about our intimate life, and I hope you still find it exciting, she said, with a reproach in her voice. Partially, I answered, pausing and choosing my words. I like the idea of someone being part of our game, as long as it stays between us and doesn't become public. I work at a school, and it would be a disaster if your photos went viral. I reminded her that I also have something to lose. I didn't like the way she made me feel like it was all my fault. I have indeed shown interest in connecting with other men online many times to spice up our relationship, but her choice to do so with me today felt natural. I think we were both overwhelmed with emotion by what had happened, and I needed time to process what had happened before responding to her fears. It didn't feel right to tell her that I was turned on by the fact that he was from our hometown. I knew that she was unlikely to understand how fear could increase my arousal. My internal frustration and awkwardness returned me to my usual state, which I understood better every day. I was silent, turned on my side, and pretended to fall asleep. It didn't take long before I heard her quiet, sleepy snoring. She slept, not noticing my condition. It hasn't gone away since I went to bed. It constantly reminded me of what happened, and if it had a voice, it would shout commands at me that even I would not understand. I rolled over onto my back and looked at my sleeping wife again. She was still lying on her side, sleeping peacefully. I started to slowly satisfy myself. Thoughts of what had happened, of what could have happened, filled my mind again. My mind conjured images of my wife enjoying herself while looking at the body of a young stranger on our computer screen. I imagined how the same young body breaks out of the monitor and carries her to the very bed in which I was now lying. In my mind, I stood at the edge of the bed, watching her give herself to him, letting him do whatever he wanted. I lifted the sheets and got out of bed. Entering the room, I locked the door behind me. For a moment, I thought about checking my email through her phone. I still wondered if this stranger responded to us personally. I unlocked her phone and saw her email on the first screen. I didn't intend to look into her correspondence, but I felt bad when I noticed the name in her mailbox. This was the address of the same man with whom we corresponded, and letters from him came after our conversation. I realized they were probably sent while she was in the bathroom, presumably taking a shower. The letter was from her, and in it, she asked if he really wanted to be with a married woman, knowing that it was her. To which he replied in the affirmative, and she clearly liked it, judging by her next message. She wrote to him, "Come to my work tomorrow at lunchtime, around 1 o'clock. The husband will be there, and all the other employees will be gone for a couple of hours. Please don't tell my husband that I invited you and that you are the person we met online. I want to meet you without any pressure." She wants to meet him, I whispered to myself. Her desire to see him, knowing what he wanted, meant to me that she was truly interested in him. I tried to calm down so I could read his next answer, but the room continued to spin before my eyes. I was able to scroll through and look at his answer, despite my shaking hands. It became clear to me that this letter had not been opened and she had not yet read it. The contents of the message included his phone number and a request that she call him. I looked at his number and her offer to meet at her work. Everything that was happening suddenly became reality much faster than I could have imagined. I was offended that she didn't tell me that she had written to him, but I understood that I had done the same thing before. The fear that she would be angry that I was not fully participating in this game disappeared, and now I was free to enjoy the agonizing anticipation of the thought of my wife sharing the bed with another man. I opened my own email account to see if I had received a response from him. There was a new unread message from just a few minutes ago. His message read, "I won't tell anyone about this unless she wants me to. I won't insist, but it seems to me that when she finds out who I am, she will immediately trust me. Would you like to help me show you how another man can treat your wife in bed?" He sounded confident and even a little cocky, but his confidence excited my need for danger. I thought about everything I had read and decided to do it my way. I quietly left the bathroom and went into another room so that I could be away from the bedroom where my wife was sleeping. Returning to her mailbox, I called the number he left for her. While the phone was ringing, I noticed that my hand was shaking so much with excitement that I had to support it with my other hand. There was a soft greeting on the other end. It was late, and I wasn't sure, but it seemed to me that this was the same person with whom we had video chatted. "I think we met online this evening, and I saw that you left your number for my wife. I decided to call you first," I said quickly so that he wouldn't interrupt me. "Aren't you angry?" he asked. "No, and I know she plans to meet you at the office tomorrow. I am very serious when I say that I am glad that she wants to see you. You mentioned that she would trust you right away. What do you mean?" I asked. "Before I tell you who I am, are you really saying you're willing to let me have sex with her?" he asked. I stumbled over the word yes, because for the first time, it started to feel very real. "Does she know you're calling me?" It was strange for me to receive messages from 3 different email addresses and think that you must be hiding the truth from each other, he continued. "She doesn't know that I'm calling, but I'm interested in making sure that we can get to know each other better. I happened to see the letter you wrote to her and wanted to understand who you are before she decides to meet you face to face," I said, trying to explain myself. "She said you'll be in the office tomorrow, so you don't have to worry. When I walk in, she'll recognize me right away. It's like she doesn't want anything to happen tomorrow because you weren't supposed to know about it." "That I will come. If you really want to help, I would advise you to cancel the visit at the last moment," he laughed. There was silence on the phone as we both thought about his last words. I thought about his proposal and tried to understand what it would mean if he met her alone. "Would you rather meet her alone?" I asked. "I think we'll have a better chance of being honest with each other and getting her to take her clothes off if you're not there the first time. It'll seem like she's cheating on you, but I think you're the kind of person who might even like it," he said, testing the waters. "She's my wife, and I care about her safety. If I knew you weren't a threat and wouldn't cause me any problems other than having sex with her, I would have agreed," I replied thoughtfully. "Actually, if you can convince me that you are a decent person, I will help you," I said, not expecting what he might answer. "Is this a real promise? I want you to really help me and promise not to interfere. Otherwise, I may have to tell her about this conversation if you deceive me," he said, trying to trick me into agreeing. This stranger had already captured my wife's attention and had humiliating information to disseminate publicly. But all he really wanted was Rachel, and he needed my help to make it happen. His self-confidence and blackmail made me think about meeting him halfway. "Yes, but only if you can prove that you don't need to be afraid. You have to be someone she instantly feels comfortable with, I said, thinking that he couldn't guarantee that. Now you have my number, so there's no point in hiding who I am. My name is Sam. I'm her little brother's best friend. I was at your wedding, and I'm close to her family. I was in the same year as you last year. I think you remember me. I even worked for her in the summer. Now I'm waiting for your full help, he said, and there was clearly a sense of victory in his tone. Oh my God, was all I could say. I never would have thought that it could be him. Sam was a regular visitor to my wife's family's home for many years, and he did sometimes work for her in the summer. He is perhaps one of the closest and most trusted people she knows. Thanks to his friendship with her brother, he even attended parts of my bachelor party where relatives were invited. Now agree to the promise, just like you promised. Are you willing to find a last-minute reason not to show up at the office tomorrow afternoon? He said demandingly. I agreed. One last thing before we hang up. You understand that I will try to have sex with her, and if it works, it won't be the last time. You have to accept that you won't see it happen the first time. I know you are the kind of guy who would love to be a cuckold, and I'm going to let you experience it to the fullest, he said in a cool, confident voice. She may not be interested. She thinks of you as part of the family. Have you thought about what would happen if she rejected you? Now I know you're not dangerous, but whatever happens, I want to know how everything will pass, I said doubtfully. You'll find out, he said and hung up. I looked at my wife's phone, which I was holding in my hands, and decided to fulfill my promise to help him. I deleted the letter that included his phone number so that she would never find out who he was and cancel their meeting. I then deleted the call from her history before returning the phone to the bathroom where I found it. After that, I found myself in the same place as before, satisfying myself. As I stroked myself in the mirror, I reflected on how serious things had become, as this family friend was completely determined to cuck me. It humbled me that this was the same young guy who had grown up playing in my wife's house, knowing that just a year ago I would have considered him completely harmless. The thought that he could have sex with my wife tomorrow on her desk finally gave me the emotion I was waiting for. I looked at myself in the mirror and, taking a napkin, wiped the reflection of the man who was looking at me. There was still a small part of me that tried to convince me that this meeting tomorrow could help us go beyond the usual. But this voice sounded weaker and weaker. The next morning, my wife, as usual, got up before me. She had her own business and was always the first to open a store. I still felt tired and embarrassed that I was in possession of her secret. I lay in bed, barely opening one eye, and watched her get ready. I saw her selecting a few items from her closet and then choosing an outfit that was completely inappropriate for her typical workday. She took a semi-casual dress from the closet and put it aside. Then she chose a set of her favorite underwear that was in her top drawer. Seeing her put on a lace thong to go to work made me tense up under the covers. She worked at a farm animal feed store, and I couldn't remember the last time she wore a dress like that and her best underwear to work. I secretly watched as she pretended in front of the mirror, applied makeup, and carefully styled her hair. She turned to the mirror and looked at herself appraisingly. I wanted to tell her how great she looked before she left, but I decided not to draw attention to her efforts. As soon as the door closed behind her, I immediately began to satisfy myself. I had just seen what my provocations had led to, and the thought that my wife might succumb to the temptation of this young guy continued to worry me. Fear washed over me again, but instead of stopping, I thought about how else I could help Sam. I took the tablet and wrote him a message. You must arrive exactly at 12:20. At this time, I will tell her that I will not be able to come to the office. I took a shower, got dressed, and went to work. The day should have been the same as always, but my mind was filled with images of my wife dating this mysterious suitor. It was obvious that she wanted to make an impression, but it was not entirely clear how far she would go to do so. I had no idea how she would react when she found out that this suitor was Sam. I might never have agreed to let Sam meet her alone if it weren't for the security cameras in the store. The cameras can be viewed remotely, and given that Rachel has virtually no idea how they work, I didn't expect her to realize they were on. Although I trusted Sam, I had to admit to myself that I didn't know the side of him that he was going to show her. I wanted to see everything that would happen with my own eyes. It was an ordinary Friday, and I was released from classes early. I arrived home a little before noon and prepared my computer to monitor the store's security camera. On the screen, I saw employees begin to leave their workplaces, as was customary on Friday afternoon. I saw my wife sitting at her desk, awaiting my arrival. She looked amazing, and as I secretly watched her, I realized how lucky I was. I felt a little awkward watching my wife through the screen, but the mixed feelings and excitement gave me a new surge of passion that I couldn't explain. I watched the camera in her office, and the camera pointed at the parking lot. My stomach dropped when I saw the car Sam was driving. I was so nervous that my mind was telling me to panic. When I saw him approach the store door, I knew it was too late to turn back. I picked up the phone in my hand and called my wife moments before he arrived at the door. She answered the phone with a typical business greeting. I replied, "Hey, honey, I can't have lunch with you today. I'm a science fair judge, and I'll be busy all day." I paused, waiting for her response and the possibility of a confession. "Today, why today?" she replied. "I don't have lunch with us, and you always come on Friday." I knew that her pleas were not sincere and seemed false to me. I knew my wife, and if she wanted me to come, I would have to leave, but her demands were not convincing. "I'm sorry, dear, I won't be able to come today, but I'll make up for lost time at dinner tonight," I said, trying to soften her insistent tone. Through the camera, I could see Sam enter the front door of the store and hear the doorbell ringing on the phone. I waited until my wife shouted, "We're closed," before hanging up. I laughed guiltily when I saw the look of surprise on her face when she realized it could have been a stranger in the store with her alone. Moving from camera to camera, I could see her leaving the office and meeting Sam at the front desk. I didn't hear their conversation, but I saw that they spoke very friendly, as usual. They had known each other for years, and when Rachel was younger, she would sometimes babysit Sam. A few minutes later, I saw Sam move further into the office and disappear into the bathroom. While he was in the bathroom, I witnessed Rachel tearing her office apart. It looked like she had thrown all her files on the floor. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I assumed it was something I'd missed in their silent conversation. After Sam left the bathroom and returned to the office, I watched as the two of them carefully went through all the files that had been thrown on the floor. I saw them working quietly side by side for almost an hour, and it didn't look promising. Rachel eventually sat down in one of her chairs and began playing with her cell phone, and soon after, she left the room entirely, leaving Sam to work alone. It looked like Rachel had been gone for a long time, and I wondered if she had shot him. Sam continued to work alone, and in her absence began looking through his own phone. His actions were similar to someone typing a message. After a few more minutes, I saw him quickly put the phone back in his pocket and go back to work before Rachel re-entered the room. She sat down in the same chair as before and sank down with an unhappy expression on her face. She then perked up and looked very distracted and confused as she suddenly looked at Sam. He reached for his phone again and stared at the screen. He stood up and walked over to Rachel, but he didn't even seem to look at her. When he approached, it seemed as if Rachel had just seen a ghost, but it was obvious that he had not yet noticed the expression on her face. When he reached her, my heart began to leave my body, and what I saw made me horny. She stood up to greet his approach, and he put his arm around her waist and shoulders. Her body was pressed between him and the wall behind her. I watched with wide eyes in disbelief as he kissed her deeply. Her open hands explored the surface of his chest. He physically felt her body. His firm grip seemed to know no bounds. Their actions seemed rough at times, and I almost wondered if she didn't like it. I saw her trying to tell him something, but it only seemed to encourage him. He was on top of her and delighting my wife in a way I hadn't done in years. I saw the guilty expression on my wife's face change momentarily as he kissed her and groped her body. She seemed to be sinking deeper into ecstasy with her young lover when suddenly her dress fell to the floor. The first thing I noticed was that she wasn't wearing any underwear, and I was puzzled as to how anyone could take them off so quickly. Feeling her dress, he stood and looked at her naked body from a distance of several feet. I was surprised how he could so easily capture my wife's nude figure and take it for himself in less than 24 hours. As they stood aside, he was talking to his part-time boss, who also happened to be my hot wife. It was then that I suddenly realized that I was completely naked, watching them. Just a year ago, he was in my math class, but now it seemed like he was going to teach my wife something new. He walked up to her, putting his arm around her waist. His arms slowly wrapped around her, and between them there was a subtle spark that grew with every moment. She stopped, feeling his strength and warmth. Their bodies were close to each other, and it seemed that the very silence around was filled with some kind of expectation. He looked at her with a slight smile, as if he was in no hurry and enjoying every second. She bowed her head slightly, their gazes met, and at that moment he, without taking his eyes off, leaned towards her lips. His kiss was soft at first, but then became deeper, filled with inner fire and passion that seemed both restrained and sincere. Her breathing became uneven, and she felt her heart begin to beat faster. Her arms involuntarily rose, hugging him when he, with a slight movement, brought her even closer, immersing himself in this moment. At some point, he gently ran his hand along her back, as if studying every line of her body, and she seemed to momentarily forget about everything around her. Their intimacy was filled with tension, and it seemed as if time had stopped for them. When he stopped, pulling away, they both silently looked at each other, and it was as if another invisible connection had appeared between them, which did not require words. He looked at her with a slight smile, took a step back, and said something that made her feel a little embarrassed. Her hands slowly slid to the hem of her dress. She flinched slightly when he gently but firmly held her wrist, hinting that the moment was not over yet. She froze, not taking her eyes off him, feeling anticipation wash over her. When he left for a moment, she remained where she was, bowing slightly, awaiting his return. It was a moment filled with such deep intimacy that it seemed as if nothing in this world mattered anymore. The very thought that she was now sharing this moment with him was quite exciting and exciting. Her gaze began to sparkle with a slight gleam as she stood up on the table and looked at the door. When he returned and closed the door behind him, it was like a sign that the two of them were here for something meaningful and special. Everything around her seemed to dissolve, leaving only the two of them and a moment that filled her with a feeling of deep acceptance and trust. For me, it was an encounter with a secret dream that finally became a reality. That's when I saw Sam walk over to the computer console behind the desk. This console controls the video cameras, and before touching it, he smiled as he looked at the nearest camera. Then the camera went dark, and I couldn't see anything. "That bastard," I screamed. "He is going to have sex with my wife," and stopped me from watching. I remembered our conversation on the phone the night before. He told me that for the first time he wanted her to be alone, and he must have known that the video cameras were his former employee. I agreed to help him, but I desperately wanted to see it with my own eyes. I sat at home for almost an hour, going crazy, thinking about what could be happening. Within an hour, I was satisfying myself again, but my torture only intensified. I had to try to witness it myself, or at least see if it was still going on. I got into the car and drove to the feed store. I felt danger on the road because I was driving instinctively while my mind was conjuring images of what I might see. As I approached the store, I saw that the same car Sam arrived in was still in the parking lot. I pulled into the parking lot, but stopped at the edge of the lot so as not to alert anyone in the store to my presence. I could see the image inside, standing near the glass-painted door of the store. I saw that it was Sam, and his back was to me. He was dressed and looked like he was talking to someone further down the store. I didn't know what to do. Should I go to the door just as he might be leaving, or should I leave them alone? I couldn't see Rachel from my vantage point and wondered how I would be able to find her if I walked in unannounced. I figured catching her with me wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I was willing to admit that I knew she would meet him today. I thought that if he told her that I knew about their plan, it would have to be called off after what I saw. I might take a chance to get a better look. I got out of the car, walked around the perimeter of the parking lot, and ended up near a smaller side window that looked out into the store's lobby. They were both dressed and talking near the front door, just like before, and from what I could see, Sam was holding something in his hand. I looked closer and saw that they were very similar to the thong I saw Rachel wearing this morning. It looked like he was teasing her by dangling the thong in front of her. I leaned towards the window to listen as best I could to their conversation and strained my eyes, trying to understand what was happening. Mostly I heard mumbles, but at times I could make out what Rachel was saying as the volume of her protests increased. I heard her raise her voice and say, "Sam, are you going to treat me like some trophy cougar you tell your friends about, or are you the nice gentleman I always thought you were?" I couldn't make out his answer, but I saw him definitely stuffing her thong into his pocket. "You can't tell them that I was your boss. Any local will know it was me," she said in a loud, playful tone. Her side of the conversation sounded like she was less intimidated by the thought of him holding her thong and more concerned about his teasing that he might tell people about her. She then reached out and told him with a big smile, "Please give me back my panties and please keep this between us." He, in turn, turned to her and motioned to take them out of his pocket. She came so close to him that in any other situation it would have seemed awkward. She reached into his pocket and tucked the strap deep inside. Her tone changed to a more submissive one, and although I could hear her better, I could only partially make out what she said. "I hope your friends are impressed." I stood frozen by the window, not believing that my wife would be okay with him breaking any of our agreements about immodesty. Looking at her, I still couldn't make out what he was saying, but I could tell that his manly figure was about to attack her. "Please don't let my brother find out," was all she could say before he grabbed her dress and tore it from top to bottom. The cloth lay in tatters on the floor, and some of it was still wrapped around her ankles. He carried her across the room and placed her naked body on the counter where her clients were checking her out. She raised her legs, sat on the edge of the counter, and met his gaze. A mixture of excitement and slight challenge was visible in her eyes. The man took a step forward, paused for a moment, as if assessing her determination, and then carefully took out a small object, offering to use it as a precaution. She accepted it with a slight smile, as if she was deciding what decision to make, and after a brief glance, she put it aside. This minor detail between them brought a new wave of tension, as if an unresolved issue hung in the air. He came closer, their gazes crossed again, and they, as if forgetting about time, stood in silence, full of determination and challenge. It seemed that every glance, every movement mattered, as if they were speaking without words. The feeling was as if everything around had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in this silence, in which there were so many unnamed feelings. Behind the glass, out of their sight, stood her husband. At first he watched with slight surprise, not understanding what exactly he was seeing. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized that something significant was happening to his wife, not just a chance meeting, but a moment that seemed to be prepared by time. His feelings were complex and mixed. Jealousy struggled with bewilderment, anxiety with suddenly awakened interest. Meanwhile, in the room inside, she seemed to oscillate between determination and uncertainty, looking into his eyes as if seeking confirmation of her feelings. The man, on the contrary, looked calm and confident, as if he knew that this moment was inevitable, and he was ready to wait until her doubts were dispelled. She pretended that she was about to leave, turned away, but stopped every time, as if an inner voice was holding her back. This silent confrontation continued, causing her husband behind the glass to clench his fists, realizing that he was a spectator of this barely emerging story. Her attention was still focused on the man opposite her, and eventually her resistance melted away, giving way to a complex mix of emotions. She walked up to the man and said something quietly so that only he could hear. There was some kind of inner fatigue in her voice, as if she had finally allowed herself to be sincere. He listened calmly without interrupting, and when she fell silent, his gaze became even softer. At that moment, her husband behind the glass realized that this scene was not just a fleeting moment. She left a mark on their hearts, causing an internal response in each of them that will not fade away for a long time. When they finally headed towards the exit, her husband hurried to step into the shadows so as not to reveal his presence. He didn't know how to interpret what he saw, but the feeling that their relationship had changed became an undeniable truth. "Now tell me why you were actually looking for men last night, and tell me what you want now," he said, pressing her body against the window. "My husband loved to talk about me with other guys, and he made me think day and night that I was having an affair. We had never looked for men so close to home, and always said it was just to flirt and have fun online. Last night, I suggested we look for a guy closer to home because I wanted to make it happen." She said she wasn't hiding anything. "What exactly did you want to happen, and what do you want now?" he said with increasing tension in his tone. "I need another man, a real man who won't take no for an answer and will take me when he wants. Please make me your prize and make me publicly cuckold my husband. I want," she said, fading into moans. "You want to leave your husband or have him leave you," he said, slowing his movements with concern in his voice. "No, I want to give him what he wants and humiliate him. I want him to see me with another man and be jealous of how he makes me feel. I love him and never want to leave him, but I need someone more to dominate my sex life," she said, looking distracted and embarrassed. "I think your husband is ready for all these things. He will hear you having sex through the same open windows as your neighbors. He can buy you some nice underwear or clothes, but that won't stop me from putting it in the corner. He may ask you to force me to put on a condom, but he will agree that I will never do it," he said, grinding his teeth as he slammed her from behind harder and faster. His calm rhythm and soft but confident words gradually brought her back to a moment in which there was no one but the two of them. She gave in to him, feeling how every movement brought them closer to a new, yet unknown sensation, as if they were moving towards a finale that belonged only to them. With every touch, every glance, the world around them seemed more and more distant, as if it was covered with a thin curtain, hiding them from everything else. She closed her eyes, feeling his touches bringing her closer to the top, and at some point she instinctively turned to him, whispering his name, as if asking him not to stop, as if she needed this moment to forget and dissolve in him. It was a state in which she remained passive, completely trusting him and his actions. He wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, holding her close, allowing her to feel their connection growing stronger every moment, as if their breaths were merging into one. Standing no more than a step away, I looked at them, feeling like an observer of something magical and almost unreal. I got down on one knee, fascinated by how their movements reflected not only passion, but also the deep affection that arose in every touch. It was a connection in which there were no words, but everything was clear without a single sound. Their emotions were expressed in every look and movement, as if they were revealing something incredible and personal to each other. Only Sam knew I was there, and it didn't bother him at all. He gently invited her to imagine that they were being watched, as if this view from the outside gave special meaning to the situation, revealing her true desires. She turned to him, almost in a whisper, asking him not to let her go, holding her in this moment, which filled her with a feeling of complete trust and safety. I watched as their movements slowed down and how both of them, having reached the peak of their feelings, remained close, allowing themselves to share this silence, saturated with a moment of sincerity. Their bodies relaxed, and the last vestiges of tension disappeared from their faces. There was a sense of peace all around, as if everything had quieted down, giving them the opportunity to simply be close, without words or unnecessary movements. Standing by the window, I felt the tension gradually subside, leaving behind only a slight feeling of calm and satisfaction from being part of their closeness. I was so distracted that I didn't notice him removing the blindfold from her eyes. With a wicked and triumphant smile, he asked her, "Should I open the door?" Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to